Hi, welcome to The Forum. I'm Sean O'Brien. This program is all about looking at issues that come up in our life and our culture and going to the Bible to get a Christian perspective on them. And today, my guests with me are Mike Mitchell from Westlake Community Church in Eagle Mountain, Utah, Justin Gort from Cornerstone Bible Church in Clinton, Utah, and Andy Bird, our famous televangelist, is joining us. So this is the first time for Justin and Andy, although they're going to be regulars from now on. So welcome to the program, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and welcome back, Mike.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about the transgender issue. It's been in the news quite a lot lately. There's been a lot of talk about bathrooms, that transgender people will be allowed to go into the bathrooms that they want to go. And there's been the story about the VA, how several veterans had passed away waiting for medical care in Arizona, but at the same time there was a veteran who was getting surgery for gender change. And so there's been a lot of things like this come up in the news lately, a lot of talking. So let's look at this from a Christian perspective. So what is the Christian thought on whether changing your gender is right or wrong? How do we look at this? Mike, start us off.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that, or I should say off the bat, I think Christians need to be quick to express sympathy with that. And I don't know what that's like, and probably the vast majority of people don't know what that's like, to be born and then grow up and feel like you were born the wrong gender and want to be a woman if you're a man and vice versa. So we should be quick to say, I mean, that's really difficult. I can't imagine how hard that would make life in a lot of ways. But it does not follow from that we should say, therefore, whatever you feel you need to do to satisfy yourself, whatever you need to do to fulfill the desires you have, then you should be free to do that. That's not a healthy and a right perspective that should stem from our sympathy. What should be gender roles and the nature of gender is made clear in the Bible, that God created us man and woman in the very beginning. That's His ideal. And I think the bottom line, I mentioned this on a previous show when we talked about the issue of homosexuality, it all comes down to behavior. And I think that's something that needs to be articulated a lot also. And this is shameful when it takes place among Christians, and shameful really with anyone, but certainly with Christians. There are times when some people have chastised or made fun of or put down, say, a effeminate man or a masculine woman. And that's really totally out of line, off track. That is not, if there's a guy that's born with feminine tendencies and by no fault of his own, just by his own body chemistry, he's a very feminine man. That is not something that Christians should be concerned with. That's not an issue. That's not wrong. That's not something that's in His control. What we are concerned with is behavior. How do you act? How do you respond to the desires and the orientations that you're born with? So when it comes to the transgender issue, the question that should be central for us is, why would you want to have surgery? We understand, and that's tough, and we sympathize with the fact that you were born with this disorder. But why would you want to have your body physically altered other than to accommodate your sexual desires? And that's where we would have a very fundamental point of opposition, because, again, it all comes down to behavior. And sexuality, human sexual relations, in God's perspective, are relegated only to happen between one man and one woman in a lifelong marriage, and that is to adult people, not one of 30 or 40 different years in age, or we come into what some people call the transgenerational orientation or pedophilia. God's design is very clear. So our bottom line, I think, in terms of biblical perspective, is again, we feel for you. That's got to be tough. We want to help you and struggle along with you with the things that we struggle with, just like you. And at the same time, we know that you have a very unique problem. But in addition to that, we recognize that sexuality is only supposed to be practiced in one context, period. And if you are born, by no fault of your own, with same-sex attraction, or a man wanting to be a woman, that's tough. But what that necessarily means is that you are called to be celibate. that sexuality is not something that can be a part of your life. And that is a really harsh, tough thing to take, but that's the fact of the matter. And we all have something, we all have some natural desire that we want desperately to gratify that is not consistent with the way that God created us. And we have to die to that. And that's really the Christian, I think, bottom line, is that we have to measure up our desires with God's ideal and put our desires down at the points where they don't match.
Mm-hmm. Well, what if we're talking about someone who it's not a sexual thing? I mean, what if it's just a physical thing? What if they just physically want to appear and feel like and look like the opposite sex? I mean, does the Bible really address this kind of issue? Justin.
I think Psalm 139 lays it out that I am fearfully and wonderfully made, that I was made the way that God intended to make me, and we understand that that includes that sin has entered the world, that all of creation is now marred by sin. And so the man who wants to be a woman or the woman who wants to be a man is marred by sin and can, as we already heard, can fight against those desires. Because our heart does not always desire good things. Jeremiah 17, that the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? Who can understand what their heart is leading them to when it's not leading them to truth, not leading them to seek the one true God, not leading them to follow as He designed? Not an identical issue, but Amy Carmichael, it might be a little bit of a false story. We're not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure. Others who are smarter probably are. But she wanted blue eyes, as far as I understand.
Who's Amy Carmichael?
Amy Carmichael, sorry. She was a missionary in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s to India.
Uh-huh.
And she wanted blue eyes. But God didn't give her blue eyes. He gave her brown eyes. And she prayed and prayed and prayed that God would change her. And He didn't. Mm-hmm. And she arrived into India, and she was a powerful force for the gospel and for getting those who were caught up in the sex slave trades of the false cults and false teachings, and moving thousands upon thousands of lives to know truth, to know the one true God. And God used what she thought was wrong to His glory and honor, mm-hmm. and didn't change her in the process.
So you're saying that it's an issue of God making people how He wants to make people, and us needing to be at least able to find some kind of satisfaction and contentment with being how God made us. So what if someone were to come back with the argument, well, God also put in me a desire to want to change? Andy, go ahead.
That right there becomes the interesting one. And the truth of the matter on this whole entire issue is God did make us the way He wanted. The challenge with that you have from a secular perspective is the viewpoint of submission to God. So that's the first stage always, is they have to recognize that there is an authority above themselves. And that really is tough for people who have no context whatsoever or who deny the truth, as we know. So there's a compassion that has to be there, and then you have to be careful of how you approach that, because then becomes the slippery slope, right? So you can take gender identity disorder, which is now what they're calling it. It's a medical term, and I don't know if they're prescribing stuff for it yet, but there's counseling that's offered with it. But how we relate to people in the context of they have no view of a higher authority who is in control is one of the most sensitive things that we can do. And he mentioned it earlier, that it's really important that we are sensitive to it, and we are sensitive to the context that they don't understand that authority. And then there is a line that has to be drawn. And the scary part is that line seems to continue to move. And so in my lifetime, I've seen that line move and move and move. And now we're talking about bathrooms that can be shared among multiple people. And where does it end? I mean, if I have a desire in me that I believe that God gave for, I don't know, whatever, to kick soccer balls into people's heads all the time, do we call that soccer ball identity disorder, and then it's okay for me to go around and do that? I mean, it sounds silly, but we're getting into that phase. So morality being established by God is something that we can submit to. How do we relate to the rest of the world and establish that fine line when they look around and they see creation and they don't understand the Creator? And so it kind of goes back to, You know, how much can I relate to somebody and not distance ourselves from them? Because that's the scary part, right? Is we as Christians are so good at understanding sometimes our theological concepts, but then living them out and purveying them to others so that they see the light within us, so that they too might look around in creation and go, oh wow, the tree was made that way, I was made this way, and so that's just the way it is, and so I have to work within the confines of the boundaries that the Creator established. And that's the trickier part. And there's no right answer to it. I don't think that's across the board, but sensitivity always must be put into play. And then an understanding that, remember, that person isn't viewing the world that you do. I mean, the same way that you do. You had said something earlier, I think, that's critical on this entire thing, and that is, there's a lot of people that go, well, these are my desires, and you talk about someone who should be abstinent, should abstain from some of these desires, but within the context of their life and the way they view the world, and maybe this is my disadvantage of not being a Christian all my life and growing up one way and then becoming a Christian. I kind of see it both sides. There's no context for me to curb my desires in any way, shape, or form before I knew God. Mm-hmm. Now I get to submit to a higher authority. So how do we relay that to people? And I think it starts with the cross. You establish the cross with them. Now how do we relate to people in the media and do that social interaction? That's the trickier challenge, right?
Yeah, that can be a lot tougher. But I think where you guys were going with this, with just the issue of gender being something that doesn't change because it was given to us by God, seems like a pretty common sense argument, even if you don't believe in God, even if you're coming at this from a naturalistic point of view, because the way they like to talk about it is to say that gender is assigned to you at birth, as if someone were standing there and passing out your gender card. But it's simply not the way it is. I mean, pretty much from conception, your gender is built into your chromosomes, every cell of your body. So biologically, it actually is impossible for you to change your gender. So we're talking about reality here at one point. So how should a Christian respond to a person who insists on being addressed and treated like a gender that biologically they are not? Go ahead and jump in, whoever wants to.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the answer exactly. How should we respond? But one thing that occurs to me as you were asking that question, and I think it's a fundamental issue at the bottom of all this, is that our culture has a pathological fear of hurting people's feelings.
Yes, they do.
The whole political correctness movement and mentality, and we have a history that's marred with slavery and inequality with women. At one point, women couldn't vote, and all sane people should recognize that those are bad things, that women should be able to vote, and that no one should be discriminated against according to their race, of course. But we're so gun-shy about that, and we've gone so far overboard on the other side that it's, the one sin is to say that there's any such thing as sin, or to say that there's anything wrong with anyone, and there's no such thing as wrong, but there's only differences. And if I'm tone deaf or colorblind, then I should, if I'm a reasonable person, then I should say that I'm tone deaf. I don't hear notes as I should hear them. There's something wrong with my capacity for hearing. I don't see colors as I should see them, as they really are, because there's something wrong with my capacity for sight. But when we come into issues that certainly are obviously more morally significant, like sexuality issues, gender issues, we at least the culture at large tends to drop that line of thinking altogether. And again, there is no plumb line. There's no standard, like Andy was saying. There's no understanding that we're accountable to an authority above and beyond ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with you, let's say, in the common way of thinking, if you want to have your body physically altered, to make yourself into a woman if you're a man. That's not a disorder. That's not a pathology. That's not anything wrong. It's just that you're unique, and you're special in your own way. And whatever we want to do, whatever under the sun happens, whatever happens, let's not say anything that might damage your self-esteem or hurt your feelings. And I think that's something that needs to be combated, because even people who think that way know that you can't take that to its logical conclusion. You can't just eliminate the concept of wrongness from your way of thinking and think that life's going to work out.
And Shauna, I would address that person the same way I'd address a person who requires me call them Lord or King all the time. You can want a lot, and the challenge with life that you have to work with is dealing with other people. And just because I want something doesn't always mean I'm going to get it. So if I were sitting with somebody and it was a male and he said, you need to address me as ma'am going forward, I'm going to say, I'm going to have a hard time with that. I understand where you're sitting. You need to understand where I'm sitting. That's just as difficult for me. And I almost play that card with their card, right? And that's the challenge with as you were saying, not hurting other people's feelings, because it runs the gambit. But I can always play that card back. Well, it hurts my feelings and do that because I have non-gender identity disorder, non-affirmation, or whatever you want to call it, and I can't do that. And so I'm seeing my psychologist, and I can't. I mean, I'm being a little trite here with it, but at the same time, I'm not going to, just because somebody wants a title and they want to do that, and I understand it might hurt their feelings, I want to be sensitive to them. At the same time, they can't expect the rest of the world to placate that either. And so I think a Christian should use discernment. To answer your question, they should use discernment in all situations, because I actually think that would be a tough scenario to be in.
Yeah, I imagine so.
The same authority that we would say God has designed and created you, that tells us that, we would also say he tells us not to bear false testimony. Do not lie one to another. And so I can't lie and call you ma'am or call you sir when it's not the truth. And so not out of hurting your feelings, not out of wanting to, just be right and say I am right, but out of a desire to follow God and be truthful, I'm going to call you who God made you. And if you can't be friends with me because of that, I understand. I'm going to continue to pray for you. I'm going to continue to be available if you want to talk. If that happens, that you can get over that and we can have a relationship, that's the terms that I'm bringing. And that might be impassable. There are some people who will say, no, I won't put up with that. And there's some people on the other end who say, all right, I've asked you to do something, you're not comfortable with it, we can move on. So, and knowing that, having the opportunity to bring it back to the gospel.
Yep.
Jesus created you in a very unique and special, purposeful way for his glory. Let's keep it at that. So.
I wanted to draw out something more that you mentioned a second ago, Mike. So say that someone does want to get surgery, and they're, for some reason, going to talk to you about it, and you want to tell them to not do that. Well, they're going to respond by saying, it's my body, I get to make my own decisions for my body. Who are you to say what I should and shouldn't do? It doesn't affect you. How do you respond to something like that?
Yeah, and that comes right back down to something I think we've hit on in a couple of different points here. And when we talk about the issue of transgender identity, we talk about same-sex marriage, abortion, and so many things. When you really get down to the basis of it, it all comes down to this conflicting worldviews. One, that we alone decide what's right, this view of complete autonomy, where it's my body, it's my life, it's my decision, and the only moral criteria is imposing on the unwilling. So as long as you don't hurt somebody who's not willing, you can't sin. There's no way to do anything wrong. You could never do anything wrong in a room by yourself, given that you didn't have access to contact other people. The other worldview is that we live our lives accountable before God, and that our bodies are not our own, that they were given to us by Him, and that all that we have, Jesus tells a parable in the Gospel of Matthew of the landowner and the tenants. And he says the landowner left his property in care of the tenants, and he sent his servants and then his son to collect his fruit, but the tenants wanted to be owners themselves, and they abused the servants and then killed the son. And they try to assume the role of the owner. And that's really what's going on here, because again, if someone came to me and said, well, I want to have this surgery, what do you advise? And I said, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that would be contrary to God's will. And they come back with, well, you can't tell me what to do with my own body. Well, we're at an impasse here, because either your body is yours or it's not. And we have to find out, maybe it would be clarifying to say, we need to decide on other grounds. Is this true or not? Has God made Himself clear? Does the evidence show that He is real and He is who He's purported to be in the person of Jesus? or not. And if he is, then that changes everything else. That changes the way we think about gender issues and sexuality and all these other things. But I think that's what's at the heart of it. That's what we have to decide. Do we run our own lives with complete autonomy, or do we live our lives accountable before an almighty God?
Yeah, so that's, the gospel really is the bottom line when we try to get down to it. So let's make these ideas practical for your everyday Christian. So the pro-transgender camp is wanting to change things that would take legal changes in our country, as far as allowing boys who want to identify themselves as girls access to girls' bathrooms and girls' locker rooms in schools and things like this. So for the Christian who disagrees, who doesn't think that this is how things should go, what steps should we take in the real world to address this? Do we try to prevent this legally? How far do we go? Justin?
There's a balance between living a peaceable and quiet life that Peter tells us to focus on, and then having the rights to live a life in America that God has given us. And I was having this discussion with my father-in-law this morning that is the Constitution higher than the Bible, a higher authority than the Bible? And obviously we would answer, hopefully we would answer, no, it is not. The Bible is our ultimate authority. But within that framework, we have certain rights, certain opportunities that no other culture at any time has had. So if somebody comes and says, well, I would feel more comfortable if, and in this case it's a transgender person deciding to use the bathroom of the opposite gender they were born of, I would say, especially as a father, you're forgetting that you are impacting the comfortability and the social well-being or the psychological well-being of another person. And in my case, that would be my children. You know, that would scar them. I'm an adult. I probably could handle it. They would be terrified. You know, I think of that, and I think of my wife, and then we turn that back on them and say, is this best? Yes, it might be permissible in some places, but is this really best? Is this really the road you want to go down? Do you want to be on the other side of this, where you are now scared? You are now, socially uncomfortable with what's being allowed, but that's the end of the path that they're demanding. And so we stand up and in a public forum, we say, here's what we believe is right, here's where our authority lies, it's on the Bible, and with the Constitution, the way it's laid out, we can make those decisions. I'm thankful for those rights. But ultimately, I realize demanding my right, demanding what I can do as an American citizen, is only in light of what the gospel teaches, is only in light of, ultimately, I want to not get those people who choose to do such things to be conformed of my legal desire, but I want them to be conformed to God's standard, to God's word, and to follow Christ in truth and righteousness and grace. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think your children and your wife would just need to get with the program.
They would
where
argue
society
very
is going.
differently. So, but I mean, they would be terrified. I mean, I think of myself and being in the circumstance of having a woman walk behind me. That would be awkward,
Sure.
if in the loo. But for my wife, for a man to walk into the bathroom, I mean, that's completely vulnerable, completely uncomfortable, and the way that we do things in America, we have no accountability in bathrooms. Mm-hmm. So if there was something that happened, I mean, that, for a woman's perspective, I can completely understand that would be terrifying.
Yeah, so this is the big question that society needs to ask, because they've been making a lot of assumptions on it, is who gets the preference on these issues? And the transgender community is extremely small. We're probably talking less than 1% of our society.
Correct.
But who is going to wield their rights or their preference over everybody else? Is it the majority or the very small minority?
Just one side note, too. I think one thing that Christians need to be really discerning about and keep a sharp ear and a keen eye open for is what you could call the sophistry that so often comes from the media and the pop culture. Like, for example, the transgender community. What does that mean? What constitutes a community? I mean, in the most basic sense, we typically mean people who live in close proximity Now you can extend that to say that people who have common interest or common factors about their lives, and that makes some sense. But is there really a significant solidarity and a consistency among people who want to change their gender, so much so that we would identify them as a community, as if there's a community of Koreans who live in a certain neighborhood in a large city? Well, that would make sense. But is there really such a thing as a transgender community? I question that. And I don't have a conclusion, but we need to be mindful of things like that, because there are a lot of false categories that get foisted upon us from the media. Yeah. And it's very easy for us to take that without thinking and go along and play the game when really we shouldn't.
Yeah, that's a good point to remember. All right, Andy, we're running out of time.
No worries.
You're going to field the last one?
Yes.
Oh, do you have something already?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
go
okay.
with your question.
Someone comes to you, and maybe for counseling, something like this. They say, I feel like I may be a woman trapped in a man's body, or something like this. What do you say, one-on-one, private conversation?
I would address it at its core. One of the things that we face as a challenge in America today, and I think in the world today, is perception as reality rather than reality as reality. And I would work with them from that logical standpoint first and foremost, and talk with them about who they are. I probably wouldn't pull out Genesis 1:26 and start talking about that probably in the first meeting. But I would hope to establish a relationship with them enough that they would trust me enough to know that we are talking about, just because you have a perceived reality and your heart or your mind doesn't match up with the rest of your physical appearance, doesn't necessarily mean that you will need to alter that physical appearance either. And try to rationalize them with them in that regard. And then, of course, just because it's me, I would obviously still point them to the Creator every chance I got, so that they too might have that conviction in their heart to look that way. I don't want to out them. I mean, that's the downside, and there is a balance that you play. But I would do my best not to out them, and I would talk to them about those two things: reality and what God says about that, and point them back to Him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's
I wouldn't be looking forward to that conversation, by the way.
Yeah, that'd probably be a tough one.
That's going to be on the tough list, right? The top
Yeah.
1% of tough things that could come into that type of scenario.
Yeah, especially if it's a loved one or a friend, someone
Absolutely
that you're close to.
Yep.
All right, so everything back to the gospel, guys.
Absolutely.
That's what we do. Point them to Jesus, and Jesus has a way of making things work. But so that's the program for today. Thanks for coming by. Hope you got a lot of food for thought in that conversation. If you have any feedback, you can get it to us at forumtv20@gmail.com, and you can get all our videos at youtube.com/forumtv20. Thanks for watching.